Welcome back to Squawk Box this morning. A major development in the tennis world, the International Olympic Committee saying that Peng Shuai is safe. Members of the IOC, though, including President Tom Bach, held a video call with the tennis star over the weekend. And in a statement, the IOC said that Peng is living at her home in Beijing and would like her privacy respected. The call appears to be the first direct contact with Peng by sports officials since her sexual assault allegations against a former high-ranking Chinese official earlier this month. Joining us right now to discuss what all this means for business is Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at Yale School of Management and a CNBC contributor, and so many implications for the Olympics, for the sponsors of the Olympics, which is, of course, coming up in Beijing, and what is really happening there. Jeffrey, what do you think? If you're running a company today that's going to sponsor the Olympics, by the way, broadcast the Olympics, what do you do?
You're trying to get me in trouble with our friends here at NBC when talking about broadcasting the Olympics and advertisers and sponsors. But it's a really critical question. We are seeing a lot of things coming to a head right now, and I think the focal point of the Olympics has a lot to do with Peng Shuai's liberation, or not liberation, her surfacing. But still, even though Thomas Bach of the IOC apparently is content, Steve Simon, the head of the Women's Tennis Association, is not, and human rights groups and many CEOs are quite concerned about this. But it's tough. CEOs didn't go into their line of work to become public officials, let alone diplomats, and winding their way through these issues. They've got to pick and choose which ones to get into. I think what's really critical is some they can take on. When you have a significant business interest where you're worried about employing slave labor, or forced labor at least, and if there are allegations of genocide, that's something they stay away from. But if it has to do with saber rattling regarding Taiwan, that's a third rail. There's no reason at this point, unless we see an imminent threat to semiconductors or actual a threat of warfare, there's no reason for CEOs to engage in that kind of stuff. So they have to pick and choose.
Jeffrey,
I think the best example is Adam Silver, actually, the way he diffused things. You remember a couple of years ago, with the Houston Rockets general manager criticizing the crackdown on the pro-democracy movement.
But Jeffrey, what I was going to say is some people looked at that in terms of how the NBA handled it. You and I may think it was handled well, but there's other people who say that was hypocritical. They've been very involved. The players have been very involved in speaking out on all sorts of issues in the United States. You have lots of companies in the United States, including Apple and Starbucks and others, that speak out on all sorts of issues. You advocate oftentimes for them to speak out. BlackRock, rather, speak out on all sorts of issues, ESG and the like. And then when it comes to China, mum.
I'm glad you made a distinction between Blackstone and BlackRock, because you yourself, I think, set a great pattern in terms of the Davos in the desert after the grotesque murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist. You quietly started a tidal wave of retreats from going to that Saudi economic conference, and Blackstone and Jamie Dimon, of course, JP Morgan, Steve Schwarzman, and people who did Dara Khashoggi of Uber, people with significant Saudi engagements withdrew from that event, and that was a pretty significant move. Now, when you on the NBA, what Adam Silver did, which was really brilliant, instead of a lot of grandstanding, he diffused the issues by trying to find a way they could still continue the games. A lot of the problem that happened, we had politicians get involved, from Beto O'Rourke to Ted Cruz, pointing fingers in unison back at the NBA, but they're really pointing the fingers back at a friend of CNBC, Tillman Fritara, of Landry's restaurants and things, because he owned the Houston Rockets, owns them, and he's the one that.
But Jeffrey, the question really is: should CEOs be speaking up if they're going to speak up on issues here in the United States, or they're going to speak up on issues in Europe? Should they speak up on issues in China, recognizing that if you do, you can't do business there? And what does it mean to, quote unquote, engage behind the scenes, or take, not to the streets, but take a more public stance that could risk the business?
What the NBA did, just to finish that off then, is that he allowed freedom of speech. As Adam Silver said, go ahead. And whether or not Daryl Morey, who was the general manager who spoke out, was encouraged to return to speak out, and he does so still now. Enes Kanter, as we see today at the Boston Celtics, is very critical even of Nike, but he's critical of the Chinese. He's critical of fellow players, the LeBron James. He puts that on his shoes. There's no discipline. Maybe the people pressure Adam Silver to put some discipline on and ask for some, but they have freedom of expression, and that was an important thing. Is that Adam Silver said that one of the things that really makes our products great, that sells so well abroad, is the U.S. brand, and part of that is that freedom of expression values. But also, they found common ground that about $4 billion of the China basketball profits are shared with Tencent and other Chinese companies, and they realized they had an interest in diffusing it too, finding that common ground. But they do speak. There's an assumption that companies, if they speak out, they can't do business in China. That's so wrong. There's a mythology right now that we need to have this quiet diplomacy. She's out only because she's surfaced, Peng Shuai, only because people spoke out right now.